Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today's session is the second in a four-part series about apps on Azure, where we are discussing some of the most popular Azure Cloud Services, together with the concepts that will help you learn and implement them in your cloud applications. In today's session, we will cover user authentication and identity management with Azure Active Directory B2C service available on the Azure Cloud. Through this content, you will learn how to set up and understand the main concepts related to Azure AD B2C and integrate it within the source code to enable user authentication and token exchange. My name is Hussam Mohsine. I'm the program manager for Microsoft Reactor in Abu Dhabi. Microsoft Reactors, as you know, are hubs for founders and developers to meet, learn, and connect to local peers, as well as industry-leading ideas and technology from Microsoft partners and the open source community. It's also the home to the Microsoft for Startups program. With a diverse mix of hands-on workshops, expert panels, and community events, there's something for everyone. So check out all our upcoming events on meetup.com and join our coming sessions. We also have a newsletter where we send you curated list of all the events that are happening this month. So I'll also share that resource with you in the Q&A. I'll be sharing plenty of resources for you relating to today's sessions with Learn modules and code resources. And as you know from the kickoff session, we're doing this series with our MVP, Daniel K. Daniel is a software engineer who's passionate about Microsoft technologies. He's awarded with the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional title, and he's actively sharing his knowledge about Microsoft Azure, IoT, Universal Windows platforms, and DevSecOps. He's a course author on Pluralsight and a regular speaker at national and international conferences. And he has a technical blog called techmindfactory.com, which you can check out. I'll also share that link in the Q&A tab, so keep it open. You can connect with Daniel on LinkedIn and Twitter. And during the session, keep the questions coming, keeps the comment coming. I'll be moderating the Q&A section. And we're so excited to have you, Daniel, with us today to continue this journey and speak more about apps on Azure. Yeah, quick one before I forget. Some mentioned like how they can adjust the streaming setting. So at the corner here, you'll find this icon where you can select the quality. So if you notice in some sessions, we're doing some coding or some text is not showing clearly, then you can just go here and select the highest quality. That will fix the issue. All right, with all that introduction, I would like to hand over the mic to Daniel to start today's session.
Okay, hello everyone. Let me enable my camera just to make sure that everything works as expected. Yeah. Okay, hello. I hope that
you
can
sending
hear me.
The camera live, yeah, and we can hear you.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, Hussam, for the introduction. Let me now share my screen and continue our journey through apps on Azure. So I will share my screen right now. And please confirm if you can see it. If yes, we can just start. So
it's loading now. Yeah, sending it live. Should be all good.
Okay, great. So hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining this session. It's the second session from our series called Apps on Azure. And today we are going to talk about user authentication and identity management using Azure AD B2C. So Azure Active Directory Business to Customer. So before I jump in, thank you so much, Hussam, for this brief introduction at the beginning. I would like to just underline that you can contact me either on Twitter or LinkedIn. I encourage you to visit my blog, techmindfactory.com. And if you will have any questions after the session, you can just contact me through the social media and I will try to help. So that's about me right now. And today I would like to talk about the Azure AD B2C, but in a concrete scenario. So as you remember, if you joined the previous session, Apps on Azure, this is the solution architecture of Cars Island car rental solution that is also available on my GitHub. I will show you the link and show this solution on my GitHub later. But the most important part is the fact that Cars Island is fake car rental company. Users can open the browser, can go through available cars, but they can only reserve a specific car and make reservation once they are authenticated. So here I use Azure AD B2C service to provide user authentication and user management. And before I jump in to the content, I would like to also answer the question why to use Azure AD B2C instead of implementing a custom solution around authentication and user management. So as you probably know, reinventing the wheel is not a good idea. And of course, you can try to manage users manually. You can create a user database. You can create a user API to manage those users. Of course, you can create your own API for generating tokens, like access tokens to access specific APIs. But this is time consuming. And also in the end, you have to keep in mind that the maintenance of such solution can be really challenging. So what about keeping user accounts, or what about user deletion, or what about the tokens and their lifetimes? What about the token revocation or any other details? What about audit logs? So who changed what and when a specific user signed in? So everything has to be done manually. So that is why there is Azure AD B2C service that can help you with user authentication implementation in your solution. So first of all, I would like to just briefly discuss Azure AD B2C for those who are not familiar with this service. So Azure AD B2C is strictly created to be used with customer apps. So I can provide many scenarios, like for instance, Cars Island rental company. If you would like to provide user registration and user sign-in pages, B2C is for you. If you have an online store and so eShop, for instance, and you would like to provide users with sign-in or registration pages, again, you can do it with the B2C. What about social media accounts? Maybe some users have Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter accounts. Yeah, so they would like to use their existing identities to sign in to your application. So again, if you try to think about your own solution instead of using service like Azure AD B2C, it can be challenging. So with Azure AD B2C, we can integrate with external providers like external identity providers like Twitter, Facebook, Microsoft account, Google, and many other services. With Azure AD B2C, we have also possibility to integrate with external APIs. So you can try to imagine where we have a scenario where during the login process of the user, we would like to call external service to retrieve some data about this user. Yeah, so maybe some external ID or loyalty number or some other specific details. Yeah, so we can do it, and we can include this information in the JOT token, so the access token that will be returned to the application. Of course, there is also a layer of analytics, so you can check, for instance, so there are audit logs, and you can check when users sign in or what happened. Of course, you can integrate Azure Application Insights that we are going to talk about in the third part of our series. So you can detect issues with the B2C and sign up, sign in flows, etc. So it's really a big service, and it enables you to provide user authentication in an easy way. And of course, you can ask, what about custom branding, and what about the branded pages? That's also available, as you can see on the left side. This is fully customized login page. I created with B2C and custom branding. So every page, so like sign in, sign up, profile edit can be used, can be customized with HTML and CSS files, and also JavaScript. So you can enable JavaScript on those pages. So on the left side, you can see fully customized login page. As you can see, there is my logo, techmindfactory.com. I changed the branding, I changed the colors of the buttons, I added my logo at the top and changed the background. Below, you can see that this is the verification email. So by default, of course, Azure AD B2C provides a way to send verification emails just to confirm your email that it's yours. But those are default email templates. So Azure AD B2C by default will send a default template of the email, but you can customize those email templates with external services. In this case, I used Azure SendGrid, which I will not discuss today, but I want you to know that with SendGrid or any other email systems, we can integrate with them using Azure AD B2C. So we can call Azure SendGrid to send customized emails. We can use Salesforce Marketing Cloud to send emails. So the sky is the limit, I would say here. So those are the branded pages I'm going to show you today. And when it comes to the user management and also something like single sign-on, so once user is authenticated in one application, I don't want to ask the same user to provide the credentials again. With Azure AD B2C, that's also possible. Yeah. So underneath, we talk about standard protocols. So OpenID Connect, OAuth, and also SAML is supported. Yeah. So what we can do here, we can integrate with external APIs. We can issue ID tokens. We can issue access tokens. We can protect our web APIs, web apps, mobile apps, and also desktop applications. So when it comes to the platforms, with Azure AD B2C, you can secure each type, different types of the applications. Also daemon applications, console applications, that's also possible with the Azure AD B2C. And now, when we talk about the integration with the Azure AD B2C, there are two important libraries that you have to know to be able to successfully integrate with Azure AD B2C. And before I will discuss them, you can ask, okay, Daniel, so can I use my custom implementation of some library to integrate with Azure AD B2C? Of course you can. You can use the custom implementation, you can use custom library, because underneath, as I mentioned, there are standard protocols used. But the benefit of using those two libraries I'm showing right now on the screen, so Microsoft Identity Web and Microsoft Identity Client, the advantage is that all those libraries are supported officially by Microsoft. You can, of course, find them on GitHub because they are open source, but still they are managed by Microsoft. And when it comes to the managing of such libraries, you can be sure that any changes in the service will also be integrated in those libraries. So I really recommend you to use Microsoft Identity Client and Microsoft Identity Web. So now, what is the difference and when to use what? So Microsoft Identity Web simplifies adding authentication and authorization support to web applications and web APIs. So in this case, what is really important to mention is the fact that if you have web application or you can have web API written in the ASP.NET Core, for instance, Microsoft Identity Web is for you because you can easily integrate with Microsoft Identity Platform. So in the end, with the Azure AD B2C. And when it comes to the integration, you can use Microsoft Identity Web to communicate with Azure Active Directory and Azure Active Directory B2C. So if you plan to integrate your applications also with Azure AD, Microsoft Identity Web is the way to go. Now on the other side, we have Microsoft Identity Client, so MSL. And this library enables developers to integrate with Microsoft Identity Platform with Azure AD B2C, specifically in this session, to integrate with B2C and easily authenticate users to get access tokens to call those APIs that are secured with Azure AD B2C. So now you can try to imagine that there is a web application, or maybe another example. So there is a desktop application and there is an API. So both applications are secured by the Azure AD B2C. And now when user authenticates in the UWP application, so Universal Windows Platform, for instance, we can request a specific scope to get access token from Microsoft Identity Platform to be able to call this API on behalf of the authenticated user. So once user is authenticated in the Universal Windows Platform application, where we use Microsoft Identity Client library, this application can call API in context of user and get some data. And how this web API is protected? It's protected by Azure AD B2C. The application is registered there, and we use Microsoft Identity Web Library to protect this API. And of course, as I mentioned before, we can use Microsoft Identity Client to acquire tokens, on behalf of the user or application, because as you know, the user context is not always important and available. So we can also use this client credentials flow to secure communication between two applications, for instance, without the context of the user. So now that's about the theory, and right now I would like to show you a demo. I hope you will find it helpful, interesting. So let me open the GitHub. So first of all, on my GitHub, if you scroll down, there is Cars Island on Azure project. And inside this project, you will find out that there is source folder. Of course, I have created a README file, so you can read the details about this project. And also in the source folder, you will find out that I placed there custom policies that I will show you today for this application. So in the branding folder, you will find all the branding files, so HTML, CSS, and in the custom policies folder, you will find out the custom policies I used in the application. So now the application itself. So we have a Cars Island application, as you can see. I can open the catalog, and here I can check all available cars now. But as you can see, in the right corner, there is this login button. So I will try to reserve the new car. As you can see, currently the reservation failed, because to be able to reserve a car, to make a reservation, I have to be authenticated user. So what I have to do, I have to click login button, and right now what will happen, my application, okay, so right now it doesn't work. So let me check it quickly. What happened? Okay, now my application does not work, but let me check it quickly. If there will be any issue, I will try to. Okay, that's really weird, but no worries. I can show you that directly from the B2C portal. I will check that out, because today and yesterday there were issues with Azure Active Directory. So some of the applications can have problems with signing user in. But let me use the policy directly. So what I wanted to show you, but it does not work currently. I will have to check that out after the session. I'm not sure what happened, because before the session I checked it and it worked. But nevertheless, once I click this sign in button in the web application, so let me open this right now once again. There is this login button. And if I click this login button, there will be a sign in page displayed. Exactly the same page as you can see right now on the screen. And as you can see, I have a custom background. I have my logo, so Cars Island. Here I have customized buttons here, and Facebook button. So what I did here in this solution, I secured it by the Azure AD B2C. And now this application communicates with the API. So to obtain the access token, of course, I have to request a specific scope. But before I do it, I want to show you the sign up now page. As you can see, users can register themselves. That there is no manual intervention from the administrator required. They can just click sign up now. They have to, of course, provide the email here. Once they verify their email, because the verification code will be sent, let me show you quickly how it works. So here, if I provide the email and click send verification code, just in a, this is the testing side with emails. As you can see, there is this standard email sent from the Azure AD B2C, and here I have the code. So I can get back, I can verify this code, and now I'm ready to go. So of course I have to set up new password, I have to provide the display name, first name, last name, and the country. So as you can see, there are some countries available to be selected. And once I provide all the details, I can click create button. And before I move forward, there is one important point worth mentioning. As you can see, I defined some fields that will be displayed to user, like display name, first name, last name, or country. Those fields can be customized. So in this case, I can say that I want to only collect user email, password, and that's it. But I also can customize this registration page to extend it and collect more details about the user. So for instance, I can collect display name, first name, last name, gender, country, city, state, etc. Yeah, so I can extend this list. So once the user is authenticated, the access token is returned to the application. And now what is really important to mention is the fact that those two applications, so Web API and also Web App that is displayed to user, those applications have to be registered in the Azure Active Directory B2C. So first of all, as you can see, I have dedicated resource group created in the Azure portal, RG Krzyczkowski AD B2C. And here I have two resources. The first one is Azure AD B2C itself, and the second is Azure Storage, where I store the custom branding files. So that's really important, that if you want to customize those pages, you have to store them somewhere. And this place has to be publicly available. So in this case, I decided that my application is built on the Azure Cloud. I want to use Azure Blob Storage. So the storage we discussed during our previous session from the Apps on Azure series. So now, as you can see here, I have this Krzyczkowski tenant created for the B2C. And if you want to create new Azure AD B2C tenant, let me show you how to do it. It's really quickly. You can click Add button in the resource group. And here you can type maybe B2C. It will be much faster. Azure Active Directory B2C. Yeah. And here you can click Create button. And once you do it, you can either link existing B2C tenant on my subscription or create a new Azure AD B2C tenant. So in your case, if you would like to play around the B2C, you have to create a new Azure AD B2C tenant. So those are the steps I followed when creating tenant for the Krzyczkowski solution. And there are some information to be collected. So you have to provide the organization name, you have to provide the initial domain name and the region. Yeah, so where your Azure AD B2C will be available. And here I would like to clarify one thing, because there is a lot of confusion, to be honest, around this country/region. So Azure Active Directory and Azure Active Directory B2C services are globally available services. Yeah, so they are globally distributed. Microsoft takes care for providing disaster recovery and handling everything. But there are data center locations, so where physically your users' data will be stored. Yeah, so this is a storage connected to the global service, which is Azure AD B2C in this case. So now you can select the region where exactly your users will be stored. Yeah, so that's very important, because from the GDPR perspective, maybe you have to create your users in one of the data centers in Europe. Yeah, or maybe if you have application in United States, probably you will select United States region instead of Europe. Yeah, so that's very important to take under consideration. And of course, we can select subscription, where to place the Azure AD B2C resource, so in the resource group. And once we review everything and check if everything is properly configured, we can create this service. And as you can see here, B2C, it's free for 100 of monthly active users. So it means that pricing of the B2C is not calculated by one authentication of the user. Users are just measured, so those the cost is measured on the active users during the month. So if there are active users, they sign in, this amount will increase, but B2C does not count one specific authentication. Yeah, so that's the difference, and this is something what has changed some time ago. So once we create this B2C tenant, you will be able to open this Azure Active Directory B2C tenant. So here, as you can see, what I can do once it's created, I can switch to carsisland.onmicrosoft.com, and there I can select Azure AD B2C service, and as you can see, this is my domain for the for my Azure AD B2C. And now under the app registrations tab here, I have some applications registered, but we will focus on those two: Cars Island Web Portal and Cars Island Web API. So let's start from the Web API. As you can see, this is my Web API. I registered in the Azure AD B2C. And here, how I did it, there is a new registration button. I can click, I can provide the name of the application. We have to select supported account types, and this has to be set to the third option. So accounts in any identity provider or organization for authenticating users with user flows. And here we can select platform, but it's not required at this step, at this level. We have to select grant admin consent to open ID and offline access permissions. Once we click register, this application will be visible on the application registrations list. So now, if we open that, you will notice that each application has a unique client application ID. It's available there. And now what we can do, we can also set up authentication. So here we have to specify in which type of the application we will apply this integration with the Azure AD B2C. So here we can click Add Platform, and as you can see, there are many platforms available to be selected. So I can select web, I can select single page application like Angular or React. It can be iOS application, native or Xamarin. It can be Android or mobile and desktop. Yeah, so here we have those, for instance, Universal Windows Platform applications. So here, if I select web, as you can see, I can provide the redirect URL, some additional details that we will not discover yet today, but if I select the web platform, I can provide redirect URI. So this is the place where the access token should be returned after successfully authenticating the user in the B2C. So here, this application was created for Web API. So here, I would like to expose this API to be used by other applications secured by the Azure AD B2C. So in this case, under Expose an API tab, you can see here that I can add scope. So if I click it, I can define the scope. And of course, I have to provide the admin consent and description. So one important thing, that's a little bit difference. There is a little difference between Azure AD and Azure AD B2C. User consents are not supported right now in the Azure AD B2C. So there is no such situation that after once user wants to sign in, there will be page displayed that this application will have access to your personal data, etc., etc. Yeah, so that's why those are the admin consents right now, and no questions will be asked to user, just to clarify. So once we create such scope, I have the scope created here. As you can see, it's for accessing as you. So it's called access as user. So as you can see here, there is access as user at the end. And now once this scope is created, I can get back to the applications section. I can click new registration and create new application, in this case, Cars Island web portal. And this web portal will call a web API in context of authenticated user. So I've already created Cars Island web portal, as you can see. Again, application client ID is unique for this application. And here, under the authentication section, you can see that I have web platform. And please note that here, as you can see, we have this web platform and redirect URIs. So here we can provide the URI of our application where the token will be returned after successful authentication for the user. So in this case, I have jwt.ms where I can debug the token. I can see what's inside the token. There is also a local host. And there is also a URL for my Azure web application. So now let me get back here. So one thing we can verify whether this URL is correct, but we will do it later during the session. So as you can see, we have this web platform, and now you can ask, okay, so how we can access the web API. So under the API permissions tab, as you can see here, there is a button called Add a Permission. If we click it, there are some different tabs here, like Microsoft Graph, but in this case, we can switch to My APIs, and as you can see, the Cars Island web API is displayed there. So why it's displayed? Because we defined this scope in the Cars Island API application in the Azure AD B2C. So now if I click this Cars Island web API, you will see that this permission will be displayed under API/permissions name. And here you can see that we have this access as user delegated permission. And of course, once we add it, we have to select this grant admin consent for Cars Island. Again, why? Because there is no consent support yet in the Azure AD B2C. So we have to globally accept those consents as an administrator. And once we granted this, API permission, that's it. We can start configuring our application. Yeah. So now, if I get back to the API, let me start with the API first. Now, in the API project, if I open that, you will see that. Let me open the project. Not this, but yeah. You can see that, this is the Cars Island API. It's also available on my GitHub in the source folder. It's called API. You can download it. It's ASP.NET Core Web API. And as you can see, for this API, I used Microsoft Identity Web Package. So this is the library I mentioned during the presentation. So if I click Manage NuGet Packages here, and I will switch to Installed tab, you will notice that there is Microsoft Identity Web installed. And now,
Daniel, I just want to quickly interrupt here.
Yeah.
If you try as much as possible during the presentation to enlarge the text across all the screens and editors, that will help a lot. And for everyone who missed the quick note at the beginning, I mentioned that there is this settings icon in the bottom right, where you can adjust the playback setting and try to select the highest quality. The video will be recorded, so in any case, if you missed any part and you want to follow along, slowly, that will be possible. I'm sending the links to the playlist and to the past video as well on the Q&A tab. So don't worry, it's gonna be all there for you to watch it on demand. So that's all I wanted to quickly highlight. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Hussam, for good hint. Yeah, so I will enlarge the source code. So once we add Microsoft Identity Web Library, we can integrate it in our application. So let me open startup.cs class, and here you can ask, okay, so what has to be done to integrate with Azure AD B2C? I have this extension method called Up Authentication with Authorization Support, and I can open this extension here, and it is located in the core, dependency injection, and authentication service collection extensions. And what's happening there? As you can see, of course, there are services passed as a parameter and configuration. And now I have to add only this one line. So here, I have to call services that add Microsoft Identity Web API authentication. I have to pass the config and say what is the name of the section in the app settings JSON file. So let me open app settings JSON file right now here. And as you can see, in the app settings JSON file, I have this Azure AD B2C section, and there are 4 parameters. There is an instance. So in this case, it's carsisland.b2clogin.com. The client ID. So this is exactly the ID I took from the Azure portal. So it's from the Azure AD B2C Web API registration. So this is the application ID. And here also I have this domain defined, so carsisland.onmicrosoft.com, and the name of the sign up or sign in policy. Yeah. So in this case, I have this sign up or sign in policy. It's defined in my Azure AD B2C tenant. So under Identity Experience Framework, I have this sign up or sign in policy. If I open it, you will notice that this is the login page. Yeah. So I have to provide the name of this policy. So now, once I provide all those details there, I have to get back to the startup class. Of course, I have to call this method, so add authentication with authorization support and pass the configuration. And when we scroll down, you will see that I have also those 2 lines, app.use authentication and app.use authorization. Yeah, so here those 2 lines are required to secure our API from the anonymous access. And now you can ask, okay, so how can we currently access some of the endpoints of this API? So let me show you. Under the controllers, I have this car controller. And as you can see at the top, I have this allow anonymous attribute. So it means that everyone can access this controller and get information about available cars. This is why when I open the application and I open catalog, even if I'm not authenticated, I can display those cars. Yeah. So now if I get back and open car reservation controller, you will notice that here I have this authorized attribute, and the policy is called access as user here. So in this case, to access this car reservation controller, you have to be authenticated, and in the token, you have to have this access as user scope. So now if I get back to the startup class and I scroll down, as I mentioned, this source code is available on GitHub, so I really encourage you to check the details of the implementation because we do not have enough time. But as you can see, here I have the services that add authorization, and here I have this policy to check whether access as user scope is passed in the access token. And how to do it and how to include this scope, let me show you. So currently, this is my sign up or sign in policy. As you remember, I defined this access as user scope. So in this case, to easily test it, let me sign in and request the scope to access the API. As you can see, selected scopes are OpenID and access as user. So if I click run now, but before that, I will set jwt.ms to be return URL. And once I provide the username and password, let me do it quickly. the token should be returned. And so this is the token that will be returned to the application after user authentication. But if I scroll down, you will notice that here I should have this access as user scope. Yeah. So currently, let me show you quickly how to. Let me check, because there are two tokens returned, and this is the ID token. Yeah. Okay, so if I expand the access token value, you will see that in the scope, under the scope, there is access as user. Yeah. So in this case, my API will check if the token that was issued by the Azure AD B2C has the correct audience. So there should be the client ID of my web API. So the audience is the target of the access token. So in this case, that's my API. But also the scope will be verified. So in this case, as you can see, there is access as user, and this is what I will verify on the API side. So that's about the API. But now you can ask, okay, so how to integrate it on the application side where user can authenticate. So let me quickly open this web application. Once again, and I will check the redirect URL just to make sure that it works as expected. And now what I can do, let me quickly check App Registrations tab, because I think that there is a wrong reply URL used. So let me open authentication. Yeah, so that should be used there. Okay. Let me save it and let me check whether it works now. I will also launch Web API to make sure that it works. Yeah. So now let's open the catalog. There are available cars. I want to sign in. Let's check. The sign-in page, as you can see, it's displayed. And the reason why it didn't work previously, the wrong return URL was used. So here I can provide the credentials like this, provide my password, and I can click sign in button. Yeah. And currently, as you can see, I'm signed in as Daniel and my last name. I will not pronounce it because it's hard. So it's Daniel K. And so there is a greeting for the user. Yeah. And now if I go to the catalog tab and I click reserve the car button, right now, as you can see, I can select the available dates here. I select one of the dates here. So maybe like this, and I can click save button. Yeah. And the reservation is created, as you can see. If I click this link here, hello Daniel, the edit profile policy will be open, which is also handled by the Azure AD B2C. So as you can see, this is my first name, my last name, and the country I can add and display name. I can click continue and I can update the information about my user profile. So now if I get back to the source code of this application, let me quickly show you what's happening there. Again, when it comes to the NuGet packages, here I have this Microsoft Identity Web library installed. So let me show you quickly. Yeah, it's here, Microsoft Identity Web. And also the second package is called Microsoft Identity Web UI. So those are the two packages, Microsoft Identity Web and Microsoft Identity Web.ui. This first package is required to integrate with the Azure AD B2C, and the second one will help you to integrate this authentication UI in your application. So that's why I had this login button at the top. Yeah, so I use Microsoft Identity Web UI. So now the question is how to integrate with Azure AD B2C in this kind of application. This is Blazor server application in this case. Of course, ASP.NET Core still, but this is the Blazor app. And in this Blazor app, what I have here, as you can see, I have in the configure services in the startup.cs class, I have this line called services at Microsoft Identity Web Authentication. I have to pass the configuration and the name of the section in the app settings file. So again, if I open app settings JSON, you will find out that here I have this section for the Azure AD B2C. Yeah, and this is really important that I have to provide the instance, the client ID, the client secret. I will explain it later. That's not the subject of the current discussion, but the most important details are instance, client ID, callback URL, so where the token should be returned, and also the name of the policies. So as you can see, I have the sign up or sign in policy, but also there is edit profile policy. So that's why when I clicked my name at the top, I was redirected to the B2C. So now here, what I have also, I have this second line, enable token acquisition to call Downstream API. So first line will enable you to provide user authentication. So the ID token will be returned and application will know who the user is. The second line is provided to obtain access token for a specific API. So as you can see here in the configuration, I have this section called Cars Island API. So let me open that once again. There is a URL of the API and also the scope. And as you remember, this scope is declared in the Azure AD B2C portal. So if I open the web portal and I switch to the API permissions for my web portal application, here I have this access as user scope. I can copy it, I can go to the Visual Studio, and here I can paste it in the scope section. And now, if I open the startup CS class once again, I have this third line, add in memory token caches. So it means that I want to cache the access tokens in the memory. So that's a great way when you want to when you want to quickly test something or debug locally. Of course, for the production workloads, you can integrate with Redis cache, for instance, to keep those tokens in the external service. Yeah, so this is just for caching the tokens. Right now, they will be stored in the memory. And below, there are also two additional lines: add controllers with views, add Microsoft Identity UI. So with this line, I will be able to display this login button at the top on my application. Yeah, and the last thing, very important, is here again we have those two lines: app that use authentication, app that use authorization. And with those lines, we can enable user authentication. So of course, when it comes to the user interface, under the shared folder, you will find out that there is login display, that Razor file. Here, as you can see, I'm using Microsoft Identity Web Reference. And this is the tab that is responsible for displaying information about the user once this user is authenticated. So as you can see here, there is a login button displayed, logout button displayed, and the greeting that you will see on the login page is defined in this login display .razor file. Yeah, so there is a hello, and here I get the display name from the token, and I can display this greeting to the user. And now, when it comes to the token exchange for the API, let me show you. There is this Cars Island API service, and the interface called iToken acquisition that is provided again by Microsoft Identity Web Library. And what we can do, we can use this token acquisition interface to acquire the token for the authenticated user. And let me explain the process. In this project, you can exchange, you can sign in as a user, and then you can exchange the existing token for the token to call different APIs. So in this case, of course, this is Cars Island API, but I wanted to extend this sample. So with this approach, you can call multiple APIs that are secured by Azure AD B2C. But to do it, first, you have to exchange the tokens. So if you want to call Web API number 1, you have to first get access token for this user to call this API. If you want to call Web API number 2, you have to again get a new token for this call. So this is happening there using iToken acquisition interface. So here, what I have those scopes, so Carl's Island API scope to be more specific, exactly the same I showed you before, defined in the Azure portal. And I can use this get access token for the user async method. I can pass the scopes, and then once I have this access token, I can add it in the HTTP client default request headers authorization header. So here I'm passing barrier token and the value of the exchange access token. And now what I can do, I can use HTTP client to create a new reservation, as you can see. So here, first of all, I have to get and add API access token to authorization header async. Once I add it to the HTTP client, I can use post as JSON method. I can provide the path to the controller on the API, and I can pass the car reservation. Yeah, so in this case, that's the easiest way to obtain tokens and to call multiple APIs. And we have to exchange those tokens. So in this case, that's really easy to do it with Microsoft Identity Web. Believe me, I can truly say that many different things were simplified dramatically. So I remember that this pattern to exchange the existing token for the new token on behalf of the user to call multiple APIs, that was really hard in the previous versions of the ASP.NET Core without the Microsoft Identity Web Library. But with Microsoft Identity Web Library and iToken acquisition interface, we can now exchange those tokens easily. So now in the end, just 2 minutes, and then we can jump on the questions. I want to remind that the whole project with the explanation is hosted on my GitHub, Carl's Island on the Azure Cloud. So you can go through the implementation under the source folder. You can see that there is Web API folder, Web Application folder, and also Azure AD B2C custom policies. So you can see in details this implementation, because 1 hour is obviously, it's not enough to discuss everything. But the last thing I would like to show you also is the second tenant of the Azure AD B2C I created. And this tenant, as you can see, is also fully customized. But in this case, also, instead of using this email, I can use, instead of using this email template, I can use Azure SendGrid to send customized emails. So in this case, if I go to the sign up page, let me get back and copy this trial email, and I will provide this email and click send verification code. After a few seconds, I should receive another email from the Tech Factory, as you can see. And now, as you can see, it's fully customized. So there is my logo. I changed the font, and of course the code is the same, but I also applied the footer. So I would say that's really nice experience. So we can use SendGrid. And when it comes to the SendGrid, this is something what is not included in my session today, but I want you to know that you can integrate Azure AD B2C with external services, for instance, with Azure SendGrid, to provide customized emails experience. So now I think that we can jump to the questions, and I hope that you enjoyed the content of this session. So yeah, I think that right now we can answer the questions. We have 4 minutes. Yeah. So.
Yeah, we got some time to answer some of the community members' questions. So let me start with, there was a question, how to implement custom role-based authorization for applications. Example, when a model is authorized and the access to view only, submit request, all access. Where is this information stored and how to authorize data rows records based on the information? I'm just reading the question as it came.
Okay, yeah, so I will open those questions tab just to make sure that how to, yeah, I got this. Okay, so just to clarify, how to implement custom role-based authorization for application. Example, which module is authorized and access. Okay, yeah. So basically, here we talking about the authorization. So by default, Azure AD B2C is the service for user authentication, not user authorization. So by default, in the Azure AD B2C, there is nothing like roles. Of course, you can define those roles somewhere else and inject those roles in the token that is returned to the application. So here, so what is the possible way of doing this? I mentioned that during the user registration and user login, we can call external API and we can get some data that will be, for instance, included in the job token, in the access token returned to the application. So in this case, what can be done? You could have an API endpoint that will be called by Azure AD B2C during the user authentication. And in this API could use some database to ask for the roles for this specific user, get those roles, return those roles to the Azure AD B2C. And Azure AD B2C can include those roles in the token. And now, when those roles are included in the token, we can use policy-based authorization, the one I showed you today during the session in my API. Yeah, so we can have this scope handler, and we can decide to which part of the application user will have access to, because we can use this policy authorization. So we can check whether the user has a specific scope or role included in the access token. So here, I think that I'm not sure if the user who, if the attendee who asked this question saw that, but let me share the link, because I did something similar and I recorded the video on YouTube just to show you how to implement external authorization store for the Azure AD B2C. Let me show you that. Yeah, I pasted it in the chat. Okay, so let me check other questions. I get. Okay, what about OAuth compared to MSAL and Identity Web? Can we use Identity Web or MSAL on SharePoint online-based application? Example, SharePoint provider hosted apps web part. So, okay, so I want to be honest with you. I didn't work with SharePoint so closely, but in case of SharePoint, the access to the SharePoint online is secured by Azure Active Directory. Yeah, so SharePoint in the real world scenario, SharePoint is one of the corporate applications, enterprise applications managed by the Azure Active Directory. So I can try to imagine that yes, we can use MSAL or Microsoft Identity Web to secure some of the parts of SharePoint for the access, because underneath, as I mentioned, there are standard protocols, and also there is a standard connection with the Azure Active Directory from SAL and Microsoft Identity Web. So I suppose that you can do it, but I would verify it definitely, because as I mentioned, I didn't work on such scenario yet. Okay, here we have. How do we How do we define this B2C in Swagger? Can we do it? I'm not sure if I understand question correctly, but do you mean to have this possibility to provide the access token in the Swagger UI? Because if yes, there is a possibility to add this window. It's also included in the Web API source code I added on GitHub. So with API, there is a Swagger page, and you can add this barrier token for the Azure AD B2C. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, how to define this B2C in Swagger, but yeah, but you can either paste the barrier token, or if you want to have the experience like clicking the button on the Swagger page and redirecting to B2C and getting back on the Swagger page, this is something what has to be customized. So I didn't do something like this, but probably it should be doable, but the specific redirect URL has to be set in the B2C. Hi Daniel, are there recommended practices in terms of managing development process with Azure Active Directory B2C? For example, should your environments have a separate B2C tenant for one dev, one for, yeah, it seems that approach is a lot of overhead advice appreciated. Yeah, thank you so much. That's really great question. I would say that that's really great question because I can say that many customers also ask for that, and many B2C users. So first of all, I can say that having separate Azure AD B2C tenants is a good idea. I know that there is a lot of overhead of managing B2C, especially when you use custom policies. But let me tell you something. Azure AD B2C has a limit for the number of custom policies that can be added in the identity experience framework. It's 200 for now. So first of all, custom policies enable you to derive from each other. So you can have base policy, extensions policy, sign in and sign up policy, etc. Yeah. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that if you have separate tenants for different environments, it's much easier to integrate to manage application registrations in those tenants. So you can be sure that there is a full separation of those applications. The third important part is about the custom policies I mentioned. So you can clearly separate them on specific environments. And the fourth important part of this is related with DevOps, because we can automate releasing of the custom policies using PowerShell scripts. This is something what I discussed, and I wrote a blog post on my techmindfactory.com blog. You can find it, or I will find it in a minute. You can use PowerShell scripts to automate the release process for the custom policies. So just to simplify, in the Azure DevOps, you can have a dedicated Git repository where you will store custom policies. And with those custom policies, then you can have pipeline defined where you will manage the release of those custom policies. You can inject the parameters automatically using variable groups, for instance, and you can release those custom policies automatically to each tenant. So what I'm planning right now is the series about DevOps process for the Azure AD B2C. So definitely I will share it once it's ready. But yeah, I can clearly say that having separate tenants for the B2C is a good idea. Hello, Daniel. Great session. Thank you so much. What is required to implement AD B2B? It is a similar process. Yeah, so when it comes to the Azure AD B2C and Azure AD B2B, there is a lot of confusion, especially that recently Microsoft released external identities, so Azure AD external identities, and the process of implementation is quite different. So first of all, you have to remember that using Azure AD B2B will not separate users. So when you create Azure AD B2C tenant, that's a separate tenant, yeah, from your current Azure AD. But when you use external identities, so Azure AD B2B, all those guest users will be stored in the same directory in Azure Active Directory. Yeah, so that's the first thing. The second thing is that currently custom policies are not available for the custom policies are not available for the external identities. Yeah, so the implementation process for the B2B is to use Azure Portal, define the external identity providers, user attributes, and maybe some calls to external systems, but the process is quite different. So that's my answer here. So I really recommend to read articles on tech community in Microsoft. About the external identities, because it was released in GA recently. Okay. What are the advantages to using AD B2C to OpenID or OpenID Connect? Yeah, so that's very good question. So when talking about Azure AD B2C, you have to remember that that's identity provider in the cloud. Yeah, so that's for managing users and user authentication. When we talk about OpenID and OpenID Connect, those are the protocols to in the end explain who the user is to the application. So Azure AD B2C is built on top on OpenID Connect. So Azure AD B2C supports OpenID Connect and OAuth protocols. Yeah, so in this case, when you use Azure AD B2C, you can also use OpenID Connect. So that's the way it works. And if you integrate with Facebook, for instance, still you use OpenID Connect in this case. Yeah, how to integrate with API Management Service. So that's a good question. I'm not sure if I understand correctly, but if you want to integrate with API Management Service to validate tokens, yeah, this is something what I wrote about in the last post on my blog. About API management in Cars Island. So, for instance, you can define the policy in the Azure API management that will call the B2C to verify the token. So you can create a policy on the API management to verify the tokens that are sent to the API management, and then they are sent to the backend service. So I really recommend you to check my article about integration with Azure API Management, because there I use this policy for validating tokens from the B2C. Thank you so much. Really great session, Daniel. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining my session. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned something interesting. And I hope that we will meet next week, and then we are going to discuss integration with Azure Application Insights for logging in our apps. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel, for joining us today and taking us through this series and through this journey with apps on Azure. And as you mentioned, we continue this journey next week. So for everyone who's with us now live on the stream or watching us later on YouTube, make sure you register for the next two parts of this 4-part series, so that you can get a good understanding of all these popular Azure apps that are being used in Danny's example. I also shared with you some resources on Microsoft Learn that Daniel recommended, and also his blog and LinkedIn and Twitter. So make sure you connect with him and you make sure that you don't miss our next 2 sessions. With all that, I would like to wish you a great rest of the day, and we'll hope to see you next week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.